Welcome to Derms on Drugs, a video podcast brought to you by Scholars in Medicine, the best educational platform in dermatology, and provided at no cost to medical providers. Derms on Drugs is where cutting-edge derm meets hit-or-miss comedy. I'm Matt Zyrus, and each week I'm joined by my residency buddies, Laura Ferris and Tim Patton, and we use our 60 years of combined dermatology experience to discuss, debate, and dissect the hottest topics in dermatology. It's everything you need to know to be on the cutting edge of derm, and you'll actually have fun listening. New episodes drop every Friday on Scholars in Medicine, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms. And I always forget to say this, but there is a video component to the podcast where we bring in the key figures and tables from the articles we talk about. And the episode description in whatever podcast platform you're using has a link that'll get you to the links for all the articles we talk about and other resources we may discuss on the episode. So we have got a very special episode this week that is very timely. So we are going to be taking a deep dive into drug costs. Why are they so dang expensive? Whose fault is it? How could we make them less expensive? And let's just go ahead and get into it. And we're going to start with Dr. Ferris. And Dr. Ferris, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to talk about a paper that was just in JAMA Dermatology by Rome et al., and its use and cost of first-line biologic medications to treat plaque psoriasis in the U.S. So this is a cross-sectional study. It was using a national claims data set, which is market scan, looking at data from 2007 to 2001 and looking at
2021.
I'm sorry, thank you. 2000, we didn't go back in time. Yes, 2007 to 2021, looking at biologic naive patients with psoriasis who initiated a biologic, and looking at them sort of as the four mechanistic classes, thinking TNF inhibitors, IL-12/23 inhibitors, IL-17 inhibitors, and IL-23 inhibitors. And so this was a study, included data from over 76,000 plaque psoriasis patients who initiated biologics. So I think some of the interesting findings from this study was, one, just looking at the range of costs. So they were looking in January of 2023, the average net price for a year of treatment ranged from $1,664 for biosimilar Remicade to over $79,000 for risankizumab Skyrizi. So big range. The only biosimilars that were included in this study were the biosimilar infliximabs. The other thing that I think is interesting is that the way that they calculated costs. So, a lot of times when we talk about drug pricing, people will say, well, but there's rebates and discounts. And so they use the published, wholesale acquisition costs minus the rebates that were given out, which, you can use data from, financial reporting of the companies, and you can sort of, from that data, estimate what does an actual year worth of Skyrizi cost. It's not just the published costs. I thought that was helpful. So big range of costs. So some of the trends that they saw was that over time, more patients have been started on interleukin inhibitors instead of TNF inhibitors. So, in their figure 2, what we can see is that in 2007, kind of all we had were TNF inhibitors. So pretty much all the new starts of biologics were TNF alpha inhibitors. And then, it started in 2009 that we had Stelara. And what you can see is that, and then in 2017, we started having IL-23 inhibitors. So what you can see is that the steepest curve up is the new initiations, it's 2017, of IL-23 inhibitors. And then we see over time a kind of dramatic drop, particularly starting around 2015, in the use of TNF inhibitors. Etanercept essentially has dropped down to zero over time. You can see that adalimumab, use peaked around 2017 and then has dropped over time. And then we can also look at the average cost by class. So we can see that it ranged from $21,000 a year for TNF inhibitors up to about $47,000 a year sort of overall. So, big range in costs. I think that so if you look at 2021, what are the new initiations? 42% of them are IL-23 inhibitors, 29% are TNF inhibitors, 21% IL-17 inhibitors, and then only 8% were ustekinumab. Maybe not surprisingly, most common medication prescribed was risankizumab, and then adalimumab was second. So average annual net cost for a new biologic increased from about $21,000 in 2007 to $47,000 in 2021. In 2021, let's see, I think we already talked about the pricing. So, they looked at, what if let's say that, every year, or when you're starting a patient on a class of drugs, so you decide, I want to start them on an IL-17 inhibitor, an IL-23 inhibitor. What if you just started with the lowest cost medicine within a class? So they said what impact would that have on cost? So what they found was that fewer than 25% of patients initiated the lowest cost medicine within a mechanistic class, but had they done so, it would have lowered the average start cost of treatment from $18,000 down to $26,000, or a 44% reduction. So I thought that was interesting. So, it suggests that, if we can understand, I think, more about the cost of drugs, perhaps we could make more, better cost-based decisions. They also looked at who was most likely to initiate a TNF inhibitor, and I wouldn't have predicted this, but it was younger patients more so than older patients, and women more so than men. I think one of the interesting limitations of just the data, and it's really just based on the timing, is that now we do have a ton of biosimilar adalimumab options, and I'm really curious to talk with the authors and think about like how, now that if you could consider the cost of biosimilar adalimumab, which I'm amazed is so inexpensive, just looking at like GoodRx now, what impact do we think that would have on the data or on their findings, and really what impact do we think that could potentially have if we weren't moving more toward first line interleukin inhibitors and actually going with first line TNF inhibitors. So yeah.
You are our resident psoriasis expert. I haven't started a psoriasis patient, so we're not even going to talk about etanercept because it just doesn't work very well. Humira, I haven't started anybody on Humira or adalimumab in years. I was shocked to see how much use it's while it's precipitously dropping. It's because I do feel like it's meaningfully less effective and meaningfully more immunosuppressive than the other drugs we have. Am I right in thinking that way, or is that I have been brainwashed by the IL-17 and IL-23 people, and Humira actually is a pretty damn good drug?
It's probably a little bit of both. So I do think if Humira, we thought it was the greatest thing when it came out when we were residents, right? We're like, oh my gosh, this is going to revolutionize, how we treat patients. It's not like Humira has gotten worse, right? So for patients for whom it works, it's still a really effective drug. I definitely still do a lot of adalimumab. I have a lot of Medicaid patients. I have a lot of sort of more poorly insured patients. And so I still do use it. Do I think that I get the quick efficacy and the ease of use that I get with an IL-23 inhibitor? I don't, but I certainly think it is still a good option for many of my patients. Yes, do the safety data suggest higher risk of infection? Absolutely. It is a trade-off. I think that the debate is like, what cost, right? So how much cost are we willing to bear for a lower risk of infection, a higher, probability of reaching a PASI 90 or PASI 100 response? I
Yeah.
think that's sort of where the discussion is. So do I still use it? Yes. Am I glad that we have biosimilar adalimumab? Absolutely. If money were no object and I had psoriasis, would it be my first choice? No, I would rather go on an IL-23.
All right, Patton, what about you? You use any Humira, adalimumab for psoriasis recently?
Yeah, all the time. We have to. We submit for one of the IL-23s or 17s, and the insurance company says patient has not failed Humira. The insurance landscape in Pittsburgh is insane. We had a patient where we wanted to start him on adalimumab for HS, and they said, or no, they weren't responding to adalimumab, so we were going to move on to a 17, and the company said the patient has not failed Enbrel. Which actually was studied in HS and found like, no, don't use this drug. So Pittsburgh's, I think it's a somewhat unique landscape for coverage. I use adalimumab all the time.
You're almost like a Kaiser Light at this point. I mean, UPMC has so much dominance in the market, at least from the hospital setting, and you only have two major payers and whatever. It's almost Kaiser-like in some ways.
I suppose. I don't really understand Kaiser. I don't know much about it. I did feel bad. Like, I wanted to go and apologize to all the insurance people that I argued with that my patient should be on risankizumab. I had no idea it was that expensive. So I just wanted to call him back and be like, I'm really sorry, man. I didn't know it was that expensive. I wouldn't have argued.
Well, let me, Pat, and first let me ask you guys this. And I'm more interested in Ferris in this one. So let's say that you got psoriasis, next week, and it was pretty bad, and you were told, okay, you can go on Humira, or you can go on Skyrizi. But if you, Laura Ferris, want to go on Skyrizi, you're going to have to pay XYZ extra. How much would you pay to go on Skyrizi out of pocket? How much? Now, no, we know that you're like a multi-quadrillionaire, so it's
super
probably
rich.
not,
That's
probably not. But
I am an academic dermatologist.
She's like one step below the Gateses.
So how much extra would you pay to go on Skyrizi instead of Humira out of your pocket?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe I would try Humira if it were like no cost to me. And then if it didn't work, would I pay $1,000 a month to have clear skin? I certainly would, yes. But everybody, like, willingness to pay threshold is sort of an interesting, the sort of metric to use, but it also depends, right? So yes, would I potentially pay $1,000 to have something that I felt was safe and was going to be effective for me? Yes. Would I say I'm not even going to try Humira for free? I don't know that I would.
Okay, fair.
What would you do?
Yeah, I would go on Humira, give it like 3 months, and if I was getting dramatically better, I'd go with it. And then if I didn't, then I'd be willing to pay something. But I was on a GLP-1 for a year, and I was willing to pay. I paid about $400 a month. I had to go off it because it caused it caused reflux and a cough, and the cough was just insane. I couldn't, like, my everybody at work wanted to kill me. My kids wanted to kill me. My significant other wanted to kill me because I was just coughing all the time. So I had to go off it, but I was willing to pay $400 a month to lose 20 pounds. As soon as I stopped it, in a month, I gained all 20 pounds back. Wow. But yeah. So
I might pay more to lose 20 pounds, but yeah.
All right, let's jump on to our second article. Dr. Patton, what do you got?
Yeah, so my deep dive, International Journal of Dermatology 2023, systematic review and estimated cost efficacy of biologics, compared with narrowband ultraviolet B light for the treatment of moderate to severe psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. This was by McCoy et al. Essentially the same kind of similar to Ferris's study evaluating the yearly cost of biologics, but they used that wholesale acquisition cost. They didn't adjust that price at all. So all the prices in this paper were higher.
Yeah.
They also adjusted the cost by calculating a cost per PASI 75. So if you had a cheaper drug, but the percentage of patients reaching PASI 75 was lower, the cost per PASI 75 it would be higher. You would have to treat more patients to kind of get those same number of patients to PASI 75. That would increase the cost of therapy. I mean, does that really make sense? If you had somebody on a bad drug and they weren't better in 3 months, you're not going to carry that out to a year of therapy. So I don't know that extending out the cost per PASI per 12-month period made a whole lot of sense. They tried to do the same thing for EASI 75 and the biologics used to treat atopic derm, but I guess narrowband UVB studies didn't have the EASI 75 data to include narrowband UVB in those studies. And so there's a bunch of tables, which a bunch of numbers. And the big takeaway, I think, was figure 3A and B. So figure B looks at the yearly cost to treat psoriasis. The numbers are way higher than Ferris's paper because of that wholesale acquisition cost. And factoring the cost per PASI 75 is also going to increase numbers a bit. In any event, narrowband UVB is the cheapest. Tildrakizumab is the most expensive, and most of the other biologics kind of fell in the middle of like $200,000 a year. Guselkumab wasn't even in there. I'm not sure why that was, but that's the way it was. Narrowband UVB was a little higher than $50,000, and brodalumab was the cheapest biologic, about $125,000 a year based on this analysis. Figure 3A just compared yearly cost of Dupy versus Tildra. Tildra was a little under $70,000 and Dupy was a little less than $76,000. That took into account that EASI 75 calculation. Narrowband, they said that analysis wasn't feasible, so they didn't even try it. Narrowband UVB costs were based on in-office treatments. That's maybe a little bit, I guess if the patients are coming in every single time, buying patients narrowband UVB units, maybe that makes sense. I will say that the PASI 75 numbers that they used in this paper, I think it was a little higher than what I would think of for narrowband UVB. Like I think of narrowband UVB maybe like 60% of patients that get the PASI 75, and they used a higher number, like maybe 70 or 80%, maybe even high as 90. So I thought that decreasing the PASI 75 for the narrowband obviously would have made everything a lot more expensive. But a wall unit is probably like $8,000 to $10,000. Pricing on this is not easy. It's not completely transparent. And then you got to pay maybe $1,000 every 5 years or so for bulb replacement and stuff. I think narrowband is probably significantly cheaper. Would you do, going back to that, if your options were getting a narrowband unit in your house or just giving yourself a shot every 3 months, having to sit in front of the unit maybe 2 or 3 times a week till you get clear, then maybe spacing that out weekly, that probably would be a hassle. I mean, again, if it costs you a lot more money to do that shot once every 3 months, you're probably going to go with a narrowband unit. I don't know. What did you guys think when you bring narrowband into that discussion? Where do you feel you'd fall on that?
So I'd love to have narrowband because number one, I'm getting a free tan, so I'll look good, and then second,
you'll look better. I wasn't good.
Not good, just better. Okay, fair. And I'm a believer in the data. We had Dr. Weller on back in January that ultraviolet light has a lot of cardiovascular benefits that are not vitamin D dependent. So I would love to have narrowband, but then I'm like, would I actually do it? Would I stand there in front of my thing for 20 minutes twice a week and front and back and the whole? But then if I'm not willing to do that, is my laziness mean that society should have to pay $70,000 a year for me to just have to give myself a shot once every 3 months? It's a good question. It's a good question. Ferris,
I
what
would
would
not do I would not do narrowband. I mean, I see a lot of skin cancer. I just, I don't the photo aging, I know that there's no skin cancer from
right? It's
we've
very
talked about
controversial
this
if narrowband
from yeah.
causes skin cancer.
But I know that yes, that is the thought, but I don't know. The photo aging, I wouldn't the looking tan, I would not do it having that big ugly thing in my house, no.
Well, your tiny little one room apartment, right? I mean, you're
Yeah,
on an
my
academic
studio
It would
apartment.
be
salary.
in your garage or something. I don't, right?
No,
It'd be a little cold to do
she probably
phototherapy in
put
my
it
garage.
in her third wine cellar. Is probably where she would put it.
Exactly.
So, all right, I'm going to first. I'm going to bring our two guests on at this point. So we've got Dr. Ben Rome, who is an internist at the Brigham, and published the article that Dr. Ferris presented to us. And then we have Sal. Sal, do I say, is your last name Scaccia?
Scotcha. So
Scotcha.
like
I've
the
got Sal
drink
Scotcha,
scotch
who's
with it.
got it. So Sal started a specialty pharmacy back when this all started 20 years ago, when Biologics first hit the market, grew it real big, I think sold it off to somebody else, and now does consulting for specialty pharmacies, payers, large employers, all kinds of people. So to bring somebody who's got really the business side of all of this. And so first I want to thank both of you guys for coming on the show with us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Now,
Thanks for
I am
having
going to
us.
start by giving our physicians who are listening, who maybe aren't as haven't spent as much time as I have digging into this because it has fascinated me for years. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the system and some terminology. So, first, we're going to start with the number that we most commonly, I'm going to say probably most commonly use should be the net price. And the net price is basically the negotiated price. So the insurance company pays the drug company, 60 grand, and then the drug company gives them 30 grand back. So in a rebate, so the net price that the drug company actually got is 30 grand. So that's what net price means. Now, it still doesn't take into account things like copay. I don't think it takes into account things like copay support, patient support programs where people can get income-based free drug, but it is just the basic net price. The price of the drug minus the rebate. So other ones that you'll hear commonly, a wholesale acquisition cost or the list price. That is, in theory, probably not even in theory, probably really what the drug company sells the drug to the wholesaler to. So that's McKesson or Cardinal or somebody like that. And then the next thing you have, so that's the WAC price or the list price. That is very infrequently the real price. Then you've got the average wholesale price. This is how much the wholesalers then sell it to the pharmacies for. So that's usually the WAC plus a markup. Then you've got the national average drug acquisition costs. That's an average of what the pharmacies actually pay for the drugs. That's based on surveys. Still excludes rebates. Then you've got the average sales price. That mostly applies to in-office drugs. And then you've got the maximum allowable cost, which is used primarily for generics and biosimilars, where the PBM set a ceiling price for reimbursement on biosimilars or generics. But the ones that you're going to most commonly hear are the WAC or list price and the net price. And basically, you can think of it as WAC or list price is the price prior to the rebate. The net price is what the drug company gets after the rebate. Now, how the whole system works. So the drug company makes the drug, negotiates with PBMs to determine the WAC/list price. They sort of determine that after they do other meetings with the PBMs, and they come up with a WAC or list price that allows them to give rebates to the PBMs. Generally, the number that you find out there is about 40%, maybe up to 50 to 60 or even 70% in some drugs for rebate. So meaning if it's a $50,000 a year drug, they're probably paying a $20,000 rebate back to the PBMs on average. The PBM, they get a cut of the rebate. So the PBM, if you had the choice, if the PBM has a choice between a $40,000 drug with a $10,000 rebate and an $80,000 drug with a $50,000 rebate, so in both cases the net price is $30,000. The PBM wants 80 with a $50,000 rebate because they get paid based purely on the size of the rebate. The insurer, in theory, gets most of that rebate, which they could use that in theory to lower premiums, but they probably use it mostly to juice profits and do other stuff. But that's part of the where it comes in, right? PBMs and payers would say that all rebates all get passed back in the form of lower premiums and the blah, blah, blah. But if that was the case, why the hell not just have a lower drug price to begin with? So they're obviously lying. Now, the U.S. system in general, from a deep dive, and I will post a link that has, I did a long conversation today that was kind of in a summary of all of my preceding deep dives and conversations with AI. I'll post that link on the website, and if you want to take 15 minutes and read through, you should understand the system pretty darn well. But in theory, so that it's still, even once you take it all into account, the rebates and everything, and so the net price, the U.S. is still probably double what most other countries are. And the problem is everybody benefits from that except for society. So the drug companies use that money. They use some of it to do research, right? But so the U.S. is subsidizing all of the drug development for the entire world. They use a lot of it to market to physicians. And so if we reduced the actual net prices to the drug companies, there would be way fewer CME meetings. The CME meetings would not be at nice places. You'd have to pay a lot more to go to your CME meeting. There wouldn't be drug dinners where you can go, have a nice dinner while you hear about the latest drug and the newest data. And other people that you wouldn't necessarily think of would actually take a big hit as well. So for convention centers and hotels, a substantial part of their revenue nowadays comes from these kinds of meetings. Right? So if it went away, we as physicians would get many fewer perks from drug companies sponsoring stuff for us. DTC advertising is another big place that they use it. So drug companies spend twice as much on DTC advertising as they do advertising to physicians. And so if that went away, it is roughly 10% of the total advertising spend in the country comes from pharma. And so it would be a huge hit to CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all of the networks and those people's, right, which is obvious whenever you think about all the commercials you see on TV. And then, of course, they use it to increase profits, is another reason why they charge higher prices in the U.S. And this is where I can't wait to kind of see what Sal and Ben have to say. I have always been like, part of my question was, why doesn't a new insurance company come along that doesn't use PBMs, that just negotiates low net prices and the whole thing? Because in theory, if you get rid of the PBMs, then U.S. drug prices get a lot closer to other countries' drug prices, but they're still meaningfully higher. And a big part of that reason is just that as expensive as drugs are, expensive drugs like we're talking about, biologics, account for about 5% of healthcare spending. So even if they cut it by 70%, that reduces healthcare spending by 3%. And it's not like that's going to give this new insurance company some, oh my God, we're able to steal all the business, not steal, we're able to win all the business and contracts from UHC and Aetna and everybody else because we're 3% lower. 3% lower is probably not enough to make them have a big enough premium lowering to make them be able to compete. And then if they did start to compete and win that way, then the PBMs and UHC and Aetna and everybody else would change their practices to put them out of business right away. So it it's an interesting thing. It's kind of what Kaiser Permanente does, but they're very secretive about everything that they do. So it was hard to find any real data on how much better pricing Kaiser Permanente gets on everything. And
So can I ask, can we get a little input from our experts?
Yes.
I know that you have done a deep dive on AI, but I'm just curious, this is sort of what's out there and like the impression that we get, Sal or Ben, how much would you say, yep, that is exactly how it works? Is there anything out there that I think like what we're getting is sort of what we hear? Are there any misconceptions in there?
I guess if I have to, I'll let Sal sort of chime in after. I mean, I think if I have to think about like what do PBMs do and like what is the role of a pharmacy benefit manager in the U.S. healthcare system, you have to remember who's hiring them, right? It's usually it's the whoever's the insurer, right? And in some cases that's employers directly just hiring the PBM to manage their pharmacy spending. In some cases it's the government. In some cases it's another insurance company that sort of runs the medical part and they hire the PBM. And I think, Matt, your question of like, why don't they, there's 3 big PBMs in the US that account for like 80% of all the drug use. And all of them have the same general strategy. They all use rebates. Everything's very secret and hush hush. There's very it's very hard to know kind of what's happening behind the curtains, and as you said, PBMs like it that way. So why not go for one of the smaller guys, right? Who's sort of like the other PBMs out there that are kind of willing to play a slightly different game. And I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of the answer is that not only the PBMs are addicted to rebates, but a lot of companies are addicted to the rebates too, because you think about it on like a one drug level, like why should I pay $80,000 for this drug and then get $40,000 back? That seems like totally nonsensical. But you think about it from like the insurer side, right? Like they just care at the end of the day how much they pay out and then how much they get back in that juicy rebate check at the end of the year. And the rebate check is free money for them. They can sort of use it for whatever they want. And it also means if the price is $80,000, fundamentally, that means like more of the cost ends up getting shifted onto patients and in out-of-pocket costs. And again, if you're the one paying for health, the health benefits of somebody, if you're the one who's responsible, it's probably better that the patient is like footing a more of the bill. So I do think, fundamentally, it's not just the PBMs are sort of addicted to this rebate system. I think the pharma companies like the rebate system. It keeps prices secret. I mean, you talked about the GLP-1s, Matt. Like, why do the 2 GLP-1 makers, Eli Lilly and Novo, charge like $1,000 a month and then offer rebates? Their argument is the rebates are necessary, blah, blah, blah. No, they charge $1,000 a month because some patients are paying $1,000 a month in cash, right? If they charge $600 a month, that's like lost income for them. Like that's lost revenue. So everyone really likes this system, right? And it's like, I think that like to sort of pin it on anyone, you ask like who's responsible? I mean, yes is the answer, right? Like everybody's responsible. Everybody's sort of benefiting here.
And from what I understand, it also kind of lets companies leverage their volume of one drug for another, right? So like Humira still, at least a few years ago, was like the number 1 prescribed biologic or the biggest cost. So if you have a Skyrizi and you can sort of leverage, like make Skyrizi the preferred drug over the other IL-23s, and then we can give you a better deal on Humira, like it lets them sort of leverage their whole portfolio. Is that right?
That's I think that's totally right. And I mean, even with Humira, we saw the biosimilars after this paper ends, the data end for this paper ended in 2021. But in 2023, Humira, there were 9 or 10 biosimilars that came into the market for Humira, and the uptake of those was like under 2% in the US in 2023. And like, why? And if we actually did another paper on this, like what happened? It turned out that like the price for Humira, the WAC, the list price kept going up as it usually does. And the rebates like went up too, right? Just the spending on adalimumab went up a lot. So it seems like AbbVie, who sells Humira, just basically paid a huge amount of rebates to maintain formulary position for everybody and to kind of keep the biosimilars off the market. And we've seen that shift a little bit over the last couple of years as things have moved, but that's the tension, right? And if you're PBM, if you're a payer, like you're like, okay, I'm getting like 60% off, 70% off in Humira. I can switch like a few of my patients over to these biosimilars. They're a lot less expensive. That's great. But then AbbVie comes and says, well, you're going to lose all your rebates on Humira. Like you're kind of locked in. So it creates a lot of it creates a lot of friction when, if you want to sort of switch from, one drug class to another, or you want to sort of switch from one drug to another drug in the class.
So Sal, let's jump over to you. You're getting to kind of listen to three minimally educated physicians about this topic. One in Dr. Rome, who knows a lot more about it than the two of us. I'm a big believer in the follow the money thing. You've made a living playing in this space and figuring out how to have profitable companies playing in this ecosystem. Are you listening to all of us and thinking, God, these naive ninnies, they don't get it at all? Like, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think that, first of all, secrets are exciting to everyone, right? And I think that is what has ultimately sort of happened to us in the healthcare ecosystem. Is there are a lot of secrets, and we want you to guess, and we want you to try to figure out, what's actually happening. And I think the secrets lead to confusion, and confusion makes the money trails kind of disappear. At the end of the day, everything that you guys have said on some level is 100%, accurate. And the pharmacy benefit manager, the PBMs, PBMs were not around forever, right? They've been around, maybe since the 70s. And the idea was they were created to save cost, period. Well, maybe that was a farce. Maybe that's what we told ourselves to feel good. But at the end of the day, they're the ones who create these formularies. They're the ones who have, company leverage. They're the ones who sort of ultimately created this system of, rebates, whether they're front-end rebates, back-end rebates. They sort of control the keys, if you will. At the end of the day, you three as physicians, you don't get to just freely prescribe to your patient the one drug that is best for the patient. I mean, you can, but sort of the complexities of how to get coverage, formularies. I think, one important thing to note in the rebating system is that, a little company that has maybe 5 or 10 products has a lot less leverage than a big company that has, 700 products. And maybe not in the specialty space, but you have to think about in healthcare, the whole book of business. So there's just a lot of background secrets that occur simply because there can be, and you can kind of hide it all. Again, I think everything you guys have said is correct. It's just, unfortunately, money is the driving factor to the whole system.
Well, Sal, let me ask you a slightly different tack on all of this. So from my perspective as a derm out here in private practice, there are some drugs that are really easy to get prior auth and some drugs that are really hard to get prior auth, even though it just moves easier. Like there's fewer denials. There's more sort of a hell. Like, is that something where the drug companies have contracts with the specialty pharmacies where they're sort of paying the specialty pharmacy to help more? If you pay them more, they'll go smoother. They'll help because they'll help more. And if you pay them less, then why do some drugs just seem so much easier to get people on than others?
Definitely. So it's one or two answers. It's either that the formularies that were created by the PBMs, you're following them to a T, meaning, if it's a new, a biologic naive patient, they're starting on that preferred product and everything's great. Or, as the market got really crowded and, like you guys have talked about in the beginning, there were two, now there's 12, 14, with maybe 8 more in the pipelines. so what happened is the drug companies sort of had um, to give themselves a competitive advantage, maybe on a product that didn't win a preferred formulary status. They are, paying what we call fee-for-service programming. That is, programs that specialty pharmacies can perform for a pharmaceutical company, and based on how small or how large um, of a package or a budget that that pharmaceutical company has, could potentially build more services for their drug or for the patients of their drug. So you may see a bigger company saying, well, we want to help support prior authorizations. We also want to help support denials of the prior authorizations. Plus, we also want to help support appeals, all the way up the chain, versus you may have a company that simply can only help or afford to pay for that basic first prior authorization. And it goes deeper as well, meaning, like, for instance, if it's a patient that you can service versus a patient you can't service. So it's very,
What does
there's a
that mean? A
lot.
patient you can't. What does that mean? A
So like
patient
if
you
a
can
specialty
serve?
pharmacy, sure. So if a specialty pharmacy gets a prescription and they know right away, because of health insurance mandated, you have to use, a specialty pharmacy that's owned by the healthcare company. And so you have to just immediately send that prescription over. So pharma can create a program so that you're even following those patients, right? Meaning you're helping assist with that prescription triage, but also you're helping to still get coverage, even though you're not able to fill that. Like, even though it has to go to that big box specialty pharmacy, you're still helping. Versus some only, can create programs. Some pharmaceutical companies can only create programs for patients that go to your specific pharmacy that you can actually service. So there's opt-ins for all of this. So meaning the patient, first of all, has to agree to be provided this service. And it's kind of complicated, and again, I think like PBMs, we try to make things as complicated as possible so no one really knows the answer. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. Having said that, specialty pharmacies, honestly, they rely on these additional services because that's really the only way they're whole on dispensing products. If you were a specialty pharmacy and you only wanted to just dispense drug to patients, you would be out of business as fast as you opened.
Wow. So I didn't know that. So they are getting paid. So if I open Laura's specialty pharmacy, I'm not going to just make money filling your drug. I could say, all right, here's, you company X, if you pay me this amount per script, I will do the prior auth. When it gets denied, I'll submit the review. If I can't fill it, I'll send it over to CVS Caremark and I'll follow it through. And I could either do that, but if they don't take my deal that I'm offering, then I just say, sorry, we can't fill that. And then I just let the patient or the doctor figure out, go to CVS Caremark.
That's 100% accurate.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if you think about the tension here, right? Like, the pharmaceutical companies, like, they need to sell their products. And I mean, some drugs that's easier to sell than other drugs, right? I mean, you talked about direct to consumer advertising could be one strategy, but I mean, fundamentally, right? Prior authorization, like insurance coverage. I mean, on a $70,000 drug, right? Like, no patient is using that unless it's covered by their insurance plan, right? You could get the price down to $30,000. That isn't going to help, right? Like, nobody's gonna take that drug. At least, the vast majority of people in the U.S. aren't going to take that drug unless it's covered by their insurance plan. So it's this back and forth game, right? If you're the drug company, you need your drug to be covered. You need to avoid any of the strategies, the utilization management strategies that all of us doctors hate, in part because they're just so like different between the different insurance companies. And if you're the payer, right? Like fundamentally, like the fundamental tension is you just don't want people to use expensive stuff, right? Like, you have patient with psoriasis, like you want them to try the cheapest thing possible that's going to be effective for them.
You want the most expensive thing possible and get the biggest rebate possible.
So when I say cheapest, I mean cheapest in net, right? In net terms, right? I think fundamentally, right? Like, I mean, I agree that along the supply chain, there's a lot of like gaming and things that happen in terms of the difference between sort of price and what's actually paid. But if you ignore all of that, right? Fundamentally, like, you don't want people using biologics if you're an employer, right? If you employ a bunch of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who have psoriasis, some of them who have psoriasis, right? So that's why you make it hard to get those treatments. And fundamentally, I mean, personally, I think as a doctor, I don't want to think about cost when I'm prescribing, right? Like, I don't want that to be the primary reason I'm prescribing a particular med. I want to focus on the clinical evidence. I don't want to have to make sort of cost, effectiveness judgments in my head every day when I'm in clinic. So, in some ways, you need somebody on the other side to say like no to you when you try to prescribe something that's expensive. Even though, like, when I'm in those situations, it is infuriating, right? Like, it's infuriating to like do something and then be told no and have to go to your plan B.
Can I ask my burning question of drugs? Okay, when a new biologic comes out, they always say, and for your commercially insured patients, we have a patient bridge program and we will provide them with drug free of cost for up to 3 years. Okay, how does that all work? How does that fit in? And like, Ben, how does that impact the cost that's reported out in your study? And like, who pays for that, or what's the benefit, or is it just the cost of doing business?
To me, that sounds like a marketing strategy to get somebody on the drug, especially if it's a drug that somebody's going to take for a long time, right? Like, you'd rather have them, you'd be fine giving it away for free for some period of time. Same as any other company that has subscription service, right? You do a deal up front and try to get people hooked, and then it's going to be hard for them to switch off. So to me, that's what that sounds like. Same as copay coupons for your commercially insured patients. Same problem, right? I mean, again, like, if you're a drug company, you don't want the patient to pay anything, right? You would prefer the patients pay zero. That's totally fair. So in some ways that's genuine, but they only want you to pay zero if somebody's going to pay the $70,000, right? Somebody's got to pay that. Like, if they don't want to just give it away for free, unless it's maybe going to lead to some costs, some revenue for them down the road. And maybe that's like free samples for some period of time before they cut you off, or maybe it's a coupon where they cover, they might cover, $500 of the cost if that's what, you as the patient owe, as long as the drug is like thousands of dollars. I don't know. That's my sort of, gestalt. So I don't know if you have like more insight into that specific type of program.
It's definitely to get market share, right? When you're a new product to come to market, you need to be able to have patients and at that post-marketing data. It's also a great way to collect data to be able to move up in formulary status. So that's why a lot of companies do that. They want it to be super easy and super quick. That way the physician will want to write it. So yes, if you're a commercial patient, we're going to put them on free drug if you don't have coverage. Or even if your insurance company denies it, they'll still, for commercial patients, provide the product for free. So that's a win because they have more lives on the drug, more patients on the drug. But more importantly, drug companies will use that later for leverage when they're negotiating with insurance companies to be, have a higher ranking status of preferred, or, now it used to be brand generic, right? And now it's like, the generic, you could have a preferred generic, you could have a non-preferred generic. Same with brands. You can have a preferred brand, you can have a non-preferred brand. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be as high up or as easy to get coverage as possible. So they use it in that instance.
How it's been described to me, and I think this is exactly what Sal is saying, is that when they come on market, the insurers are like, well, we're already getting a rebate of a quadrillion dollars a year from... I think Tremfya came to market before Skyrizi. So it was $1 quadrillion a year from Tremfya. Then Skyrizi has to come on, get a bunch of people on drug, and then be able to go to them and say, but look, there's 20,000 people that we're giving this drug to free, and once you start to reimbursement, we're going to give you $2 quadrillion in rebates whenever those 20,000 people get on their drug. And that's a much more powerful thing than saying, well, once we get to 20,000 people, you can get $2 quadrillion. So they got to get that 20,000 number to be able to get on to negotiate their formulary spot.
Matt, the other way you can prove it is just by winning in randomized trials, right? Like, I mean, fundamentally, like part of the reason, risankizumab or Skyrizi is kind of winning. I mean, you all tell me this. I mean, I'm not a dermatologist. I don't use these drugs on a daily basis, right? I know a lot about them because I write about them. And so I know them in that sense. I think that people, if they do direct to consumer advertising, and then they win on the RCTs, like they test it head to head against the TNF inhibitor and win. And so then dermatologists get really excited because they have comparative effectiveness data. In some ways that's marketing data, right? That they can sort of use to show that their product should be covered, or should be used preferentially before some of the older treatments.
Let me pull Dr. Patton in. So every time I try because Dr. Patton is very like, wow, these drugs are all too expensive. This is ridiculous. The system's awful, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, what do you, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't understand any of it. It's all just too expensive. I can't figure it out. So Patton, I largely built a lot around like trying to explain you're probably making that up a little bit whenever you're like, I don't understand any of it. Do you feel like you understand? Go.
No. I'd say between the four of us, I understand this the very, very least. And I think if I had a pet dog and that dog were in the room, they would understand it now better than I do. I just don't get it. I don't, it's not like I haven't tried. I bought this book. It was written by some of the Cato Institute things. And I just don't have a comprehension of it. And, like Dr. Rome said, I don't know that I want to. I want to treat patients, and I want to just not think about that at all. But I will say, like reading your paper, Ben, if somebody just came to me and said, like, look, I know you keep wanting to do Skyrizi because look how good it is and it's tolerated so well and the side effect profile is great. But look at these prices. I would be a little bit sympathetic towards that. I would be like, all right, I am somewhat responsible for controlling cost in society, how much society pays for medical care. I am responsible for that in my prescribing habits. Why are we so in the dark? How does it just seems like if companies are like, we really want you to go with the least expensive option, why aren't we like given these numbers when we want to write these prescriptions? And why don't they give us a table and say, like, look how much more you want to spend on this person? And, the whole effectiveness thing I always thought was a huge pharma ploy. If you are on infliximab, a biosimilar, and you're PASI 90, you're at PASI 90, risankizumab is not going to be more effective. Like you couldn't get much more effective. So the whole like this drug's more effective than that drug, I always thought that was like a whole pharma just like kind of lying to us, because I mean I get what they're saying, but when you have a great response to a drug, there is no more effectiveness.
So I guess like maybe my answer would be to sort of take systems that don't have PBMs and don't have some of this craziness. In the U.S., like the biggest example of that is the VA, right? And people like use the VA, and the VA pays about half as much as Medicare, even once you account for rebates and all that for drugs, particularly for brand name drugs. But part of the reason for that is they're brutal negotiators, right? They don't. I don't know if any of you have practiced in the VA system, but like you can't get anything, right? You can only get what's on formulary at the VA. Why? Because they've actually done the research, they've actually done the head to head, and they've put out a bid and say whoever gives us the best deal, whether that's public, some of the prices are public, some there's still some secret discounts on those. Like whoever gives us the best deal, that's the one we're going to go with. And we'll reevaluate that every year or two. If there's new data, sure, you can come and tell us why your drug needs to be covered. But you can only get one drug in each class. So, I mean, the problem in the private space where most people are practicing, right, is it's like every insurance company is doing that behind the scenes themselves. And, we're just sort of struggling to keep up and figure out like, well, like this patient has, Blue Cross, and this patient has Aetna, and this patient has Humana. I don't know, like I can't figure out like which drug is covered. So, in some ways, like that's just a patent. It's like a fundamental of our fragmented healthcare system of like, it's a little bit different for everybody. If everybody had the same coverage, then, we would all sort of at least know what's covered, what's not, and we'd probably just, accept it and move on. That's how other countries work too, right? Like they, why do other countries pay half as much, third as much as the US? Like that's, we're, recording this when, President Trump is announcing we want to, pay the same as other countries. Like it's not by accident, right? They're taking every new drug, they're evaluating it, they're looking at the comparative effectiveness data, they're saying, look, is this a really amazing drug, the best thing since sliced bread, or is this just like marginally better than what's already out there? And if it's marginally better, we'll give you a little bump in price, and if it's not, like you're gonna have to match the price of what's already there. And they do that negotiation on a national scale, and they all have national health insurance plans, right? So it's like you can't get coverage for the drug unless the pharmaceutical companies play ball with that. So in the US, there's just like a ton of different players broken up, and they don't have the ability to do that sort of negotiation, right? I mean, if you're a big three PBM, you do, right? You do have some leverage because you have a big chunk of people who, if you don't, a good example people have seen in the news recently is CVS just announced that they signed a deal with Novo Nordisk, one of the makers of a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So people have heard about this. They probably saw it. It's been in the news, a bunch of, New York Times everywhere in the last few weeks. And there's now outcry that like people who have been taking the Eli Lilly drug, tirzepatide or Zepbound, aren't going to be able to get it anymore, right? Because they went with the other one. I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Like, I mean, they negotiated between two head-to-head products and picked one, probably because they got a, really good price, net price. Who knows who's taking, off the top of that. But like, isn't that what they're supposed to do? I don't know. If they did anything else, wouldn't you just sort of say, like, if they said, no, we're going to cover both of them no matter the cost, like you would say they're being criminal in terms of what they're doing. So I think it's really complicated, right? I think like, it's totally true that there's like that the middlemen and the sort of like supply chain can create some really weird perverse incentives, but just on its face, like fundamentally, like there's also just some tensions that we just like don't like to deal with. They're sort of like tough realities in the U.S. that we try to ignore.
So I know we got to move to trivia, but I'm going to ask my derm colleagues, because there was just this paper that looked at multiple switches between biosimilar adalimumab, and basically the thing that, and it was like the response was the same, but the 52-week data of what do you think for somebody on long-term extension, biosimilar adalimumab, what do you think at 52-week data, what do you think the average PASI response was to biosimilar Humira?
60.
90%. The average PASI score was a 90% improvement. And now these are people who stayed in a study and who stayed the full 52 weeks. But if you look at their average PASI response, it was a PASI 90.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, before we go to trivia, I got a question for Sal to follow up on what Tim said. So why is, you consult and work with, payers and employers and everybody else. Why doesn't UHC or Aetna or Cigna have reps that come to my office and buy us lunch and say, hey, here's the cost of each of these drugs, and that's why we'd like you to prescribe this one first if you can? Because that, it would affect if I thought of it that way, just as Dr. Patton is saying, hey, this one's $70,000, this one's like 50, I would take that into account, but nobody ever comes and tells me that. They just say, well, and I don't even know what the hell the formularies are. You can't find out what's on formulary while the patient's sitting there in front of you. They make that impossible as well. So why are the insurers giving us the information to learn how to prescribe the most cost-effective drugs?
What you're asking for, Matt, is transparency, and that will never happen. So, again, it all goes back to secrets. Plus there's probably some legalities of the payers themselves coming to you guys and saying this is the cost of things, but also because, again, like I said, when they make these formularies, it's not the formularies are not strictly made by the best drug wins, meaning the most efficacious, the most, the best scores, that's what's preferred. It's it's based on a whole book of business. So it's based on a manufacturer's whole book of business, and then it's drilled down to, biologics. So that would literally be them building glass houses and living in them, and the payer, PBMs are just not going to do that. Like it's never going to happen, because there are these rebates, and there are these, there's all this secret stuff that has to keep, the world turning, and it just can't be that cut and dry. There's just no way. You're never going to know. And the beauty of it is, even if they showed you today, next year it may be totally different. That's the other thing that, I think they want it to be confusing for everybody. They want the doctor to not have to not even be able to say, well, patient A has insurance A, so do this. They just want it to be not really clear to anyone.
Yeah. Okay. That they've done a good job. They've been highly successful at making
on that
sure
on that disappointing note, Sal, like there was just never going to get better. You're never. All my work trying to convince policymakers to sort of make changes here.
Well, there can always be better. That's what I say. When we do great things, we can always do a little bit more.
And so just before we jump over to patents trivia, I got to say, so when I asked AI, who's to blame for high drug prices, give me a split between PBMs and pharma. They said that PBMs are 60% of the blame and pharma's 40% of the blame.
So that tells me that pharma has done a better job marketing. They've been out there telling the internet that it's the PBM's fault, and the PBMs ought to do a better job convincing the AI algorithms. So it's
all right. So Dr. Patton, let's jump over to trivia for the week. What's our drug pricing related topic?
It's just like economics of medicine. I got 3 questions related to it. All right, you ready?
Ready.
The first universal healthcare system was believed to have been initiated in 1883 in Germany under the leadership of whom?
Olaf Schultz.
No.
I made that name up.
That's a good German-sounding name. That was a good guess. All right, so it was Otto von Bismarck. So under his leadership, Germany passed the Compulsory Insurance Act of 1883. Apparently, like, do people, Ben, you study healthcare, do people talk about the Bismarck model, or is that just something that my AI?
Now I'm just gonna I feel like I'm gonna have like a bunch of health policy nerds telling me that I don't know my history. But I mean,
well, that's not
it's not something I don't know.
We can edit this all out. Yeah,
definitely doesn't come up. Definitely doesn't come up on a daily basis in my work.
What's the Bismarck model? Sum it up, Patton.
Oh, so that's, workers pay into a pool, and then out of that pool, you take money out to pay for any medical expenses of a group. So he was kind of the one that kind of first proposed that as an idea, and they call it the Bismarck model.
So in today's world, it's called self-insured, right? So I think 70% of reasonably large insurers are self-insured, so literally they're paying, it's not UHC paying the cost, it's literally the employer paying the cost. So it's kind of the same thing as self-insured,
right? Or Medicare, Medicaid, taxes,
yeah,
right, yeah. And government systems, it would be the government paying it out of a pool, in this case the taxes. Yeah.
All
right, number 2. Medicare and Medicaid were established under the Social Security Amendments of 1965 and signed into law by what U.S. president?
Lyndon Johnson.
I'm not Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, Lyndon Johnson. I got Matt first on that.
Yes.
And I even knew it was 1965 because my dad was a hospital administrator, and he used to he told me that like prior to Medicare, like patients would try and pay with like chickens. Like you truly didn't, like people be in the hospital for a week and they just had no way to pay, and then you he said it was a disaster.
And Medicare didn't cover prescription drugs up until an even more recent president, and that was under George W. Bush.
Part D, yeah, right. Mm-hmm. All right, last one. We're gonna have to do it. I'm looking for a number, so I say we do like a Price is Right. Everybody give me a bid. and whoever's closer without going over wins.
Okay,
Is that
without going
cool?
over.
Everyone good with that? All right. Currently, the most expensive medication is considered to be Lenmeldy. It's known as Libmeldy in Europe. The generic is Atidarsegene Auto-Emcel. It's a gene therapy developed for children with metachromatic leukodystrophy. In US dollars, how much does one dose of Lenmeldy cost?
How many doses a year do they have to have?
It's like a one-time treatment. It's gene therapy.
Okay.
I'm going to go $2.5 million.
All right.
I'm going to go $1.
Okay.
I'm going to go 1.5 million.
Okay.
All right, I think it's higher, $3 million.
No,
It
no,
is
Ben,
for-
Ben, you got to go
All right,
2.5.
2.5. I'm going to go 3 million.
Yeah, it's $4.25 million. Ben Rome wins.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
$4 million. How many people have this disease? Is it like?
Oh, it's exceedingly rare. It's potential. It's fatal. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, fair. 4.5 million. So next time you're feeling like your Skyrocketing is too expensive, just be glad you don't have metachromatic.
Metachromatic leukodystrophy.
Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go.
You get into like the question of like, how do you put a dollar value on a human life? And it's a really, like those are very ethical and we don't have time for it. So don't even don't ask for dollar numbers, but it is crazy.
on the next podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hey, I want to thank Sal and Ben for coming on the show. This has been it's been a great discussion, exactly what I think we were hoping for. I don't know that you guys actually helped shed any light on anything, but at least we know that people who are way smarter than us and have spent lots of time dealing with and thinking about this stuff, it's not like you guys have the answers and just haven't gotten out to us. The answer is the system sucks. And nobody really knows what's going on except for the CEOs of the PBMs and the pharma companies. Yeah. But thank you guys for joining us. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us this week. If you've got questions, comments, ideas for topics we should cover on the show, shoot us an email at questions@dermsondrugs.com. And we hope you learned a few things. We hope you laughed once or twice. Mostly, we're hoping you're planning to join us next week. Until then, I'm Matt Cyrus.
I'm Tim Patton.
And I'm Laura Ferris, and we are Derms on Drugs.